Every weekend we usually went to Glenwood, Arkansas, and my wife would clean up her daddy's trailer and cook some food for him, and I'd ride patrol with him. His trailer was on the side of a mountain above the Caddo River, and it was rather a dark area, and that night was very dark. Well, this particular weekend we went out on patrol, and we were gone quite a few hours, and we got back, and my wife was real upset, and the children were real scared and upset, and they said somebody tried to break into the trailer.
I was feeding the kids supper, and my oldest son kept covering his eyes up with his hand, and he'd look at the door, and he'd cover his eyes up again.
And I can remember seeing my older brother putting his hand up like this over his eyes. And my older brother, he was always a tough guy. He wasn't afraid of nothing. And when my mother asked him what he was doing, I could tell by the sound of his voice he was about to cry.
So I asked him, I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Something's at the door."
That old trailer was one of the old kind that had the old crank-open louvered windows on the door. And I seem to remember that they had sort of a diffusion in the glass, but the top louver was clear. I guess it had been broken out and replaced. And apparently what he'd seen had been something looking at him through that top pane of glass. I remember my mother at first tried to tell my older brother that there was nothing out there, and she was trying to be calm about it. And she went, I remember her getting up closer to the door, and you could tell from her reaction that she had actually seen something.
And when I looked up, all I could see was some glowing eyes and a hairy face.
That was when I realized that there was something definitely going on that I needed to worry about, because she was obviously frightened herself.
And so I screamed out to go away or I'll shoot, but I didn't have a gun.
I remember my mother putting up a blanket, I believe it was a blanket with clothespins, over the door so that whatever it is couldn't see in. And apparently that it didn't like the fact that it couldn't see inside anymore.
And then whatever it was went around beating on a house and growling, a low growl, sort of like a big cat or something.
Whatever it was, apparently it knew to pull on the doorknob and to push, but it didn't know to turn for some reason. And if it had turned the doorknob, it probably would have came right in with us.
The doors were not locked, but yet, like at the back door, when I looked up, I could see him, the shadow, standing at the back door, but the knob wasn't turning or anything, but he was beating all around the doorknob, as if he didn't know how to open a door. He, she, whatever it was, he just didn't know how to open it, turn a knob. Because all he had to do, whoever it was, turn that knob and they could have come in.
And they said they could hear something growling outside and hitting on the side of the trailer. So we went out with flashlights and looked around, and we found footprints around the trailer. And we found places in the porch where there were holes in the porch where whoever it was had stepped all the way through the porch.
Well, it stepped on the porch 2 or 3 times and made big old holes in the porch. And there were dents all around the bottom of the trailer and top of the trailer where it was beating on a trailer.
When something like that happens, you try to put it out of your mind and say, well, it was a black bear or something like that, but that was no bear. And the reason I know it wasn't a bear was because the next day when we were leaving, we left the next morning. And I remember coming out and seeing the porch, the bottom step of the porch had been stomped through. And I remember seeing a footprint that looked just like a human footprint, except it was really big and really long. And it wasn't a bear track.